Good afternoon. My name is Juliane Kempfield. I'm the director of Deutsches Haus at NYU, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's event. We are absolutely delighted to award our 8th annual Volkmar and Margret Sander Prize to Dr. Heinz Ickstadt this afternoon on November 9th, which is, of course, a very momentous day in German history. Heinz Ickstadt is Professor Emeritus of American Literature at the Kennedy Institute of North American Studies at the Free University Berlin, where he taught from 1978 through 2003. His publications include a history of the American novel in the 20th century and essays on late 19th century American literature and culture, the fiction and poetry of American modernism and postmodernism, and the history and theory of American studies. Some of these were collected in Faces of Fiction, Essays on American Literature and Culture from the Jacksonian Age to Postmodernity, and Aesthetic Innovation and the Democratic Principle, Essays on 20th Century American Poetry and Fiction. He also edited and co-edited several books on American literature and culture, among them a bilingual anthology of American poetry and a bilingual edition of Ezra Pound's Cantos. He was president of the German Association of American Studies from 1990 until 1993, and president of the European Association of American Studies from 1996 until 2000. As many of you will remember, the Volkmar and Margret Sander Prize was established by Professor Margret Sander in memory of her late husband, Professor Volkmar Sander, former head of the German department of NYU and founder and first director of Deutsches Haus at NYU. The prestigious annual prize, which was awarded for the first time in 2013 to the late Fritz Stern, to Gary Smith in 2014, to Leah Friedrich Pfeiffer in 2015, to Klaus Legevi in 2016, to Carsten Vogt in 2017, to Henry Jarecki in 2018, and to Susan Neiman in 2019. And last year we had to take a hiatus because of COVID, is endowed with a $5,000 grant and honors individuals who have made outstanding contributions to the cultural, political, and academic relationship between the German-speaking world and the United States. Heinz Ickstadt, by the way, kindly decided to donate the monetary award to a good cause or two. Thanks so much for this generous gesture. Deutsches Haus at NYU continues to be very grateful to Margret Sander for establishing this annual award, thereby providing Deutsches Haus at NYU with the much appreciated opportunity to honor such worthy and distinguished individuals as Heinz Ickstadt, whose amazing work has been instrumental for the enhancement of not only the transatlantic dialogue, and whose teaching and research has been tremendously inspiring for so many people on both sides of the Atlantic for quite a few decades. I'm able to attest to that from my own experience as a student of his at Freie Universität Berlin many moons ago. And this is perhaps TMI, without Heinz Ickstadt's seminar about Thomas Pynchon, I wouldn't be giving this speech. I would like to thank the Friends of Volkmar and Margret Sander with a big shout out to Joan Rudershan and Marty Black, who have been strong champions of the Sander Prize and of Deutsches Haus at NYU in general for a long time. I'm therefore delighted to now introduce Marty Black from the Friends of Volkmar and Margret Sander to you, who has kindly agreed to provide some remarks on behalf of the Friends. Marty, here you go.
Thank you so much, Juliana. Thank you for that introduction. And I just want to say as warmly as I can, welcome to all in the audience, and in particular to the Friends of Volkmar and Margret Sander. For those of you not in that group, we are approximately 75 alumni of Volkmar and Margret. We have been coming together for the past 10 years to celebrate the memory of both of them. And we look forward to hearing some remarks from Margret herself today. I do want to mention, as Juliana already did, that Joan Ruderschan, who would normally take the role of welcoming the friends, was unable to attend today. She's presenting her own works in a wonderful exhibition. And I hope that she's on this video call and that her show goes well. To those of you who remember Doris Guillotin, a colleague of Volkmar and Margret, you probably have heard that she passed away this past August. We will be doing a less formal meeting of the Friends, and that is scheduled for November 18. We welcome any and all of you who are on the call today to attend that event, to share memories of Doris and her incredible dedication to German literature and German language acquisition in the German department that was led back then by Volkmar. So again, November 18th will be the day for that. 4 p.m. will be the meeting time. And if any of you wish to be a part of that, please be in touch directly with Juliana, and she will be sharing the Zoom information and so forth at that time. Otherwise, I'm delighted that we have, again, fantastic guests on the part of Dr. Ickstadt to receive the prize, and Dr. Gross to provide the lauditio. And thank you both for your participation and your presence with us today. Back to you, Juliana.
Thank you so much, Marty. It is now my great pleasure to share with you a pre-recorded reading by Margret Sander from her home in Bad Amorbach, Germany. Sarah, if you would kindly screen share the video. Thank you.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Technology is a challenge, but it has given me the wonderful opportunity to send you my best wishes virtually today from Bad Amorbach, Germany. I'm delighted that Dr. Heinz Ickstadt, Professor Emeritus of American Literature at the Kennedy Institute in Berlin, will accept the Volkmar and Margret Sander Prize, and I look forward to reading Dr. Andrew Gross's Laudatio. Juliana Canfield has created an excellent program at Deutsches Haus NYU, presenting the NYU, New York, and wider American public with contemporary German authors and thinkers from cultural and political realms. Volkmar Sander would be glad to know that the work of Deutsches Haus, which she, of course, founded and led for some 20 years, continues in such a fine manner. I understand that many of the friends of Volkmar and Margret Sander are here today, and I send you all the best. I send you all my best.
Thanks so much for sharing this touching Grußbotschaft with us, Margret. I know she will watch this video at a later point. And of course, thank you so much for all your generous support of Deutsches Haus at NYU. And thank you, Peter Mondon, for creating and sending us this video. And in case you were all wondering what the painting behind Margret represents, that's a landscape painted by a painter named George Weiler, not too far from New Paltz in upstate New York. And it is, of course, very telling that Margret has this painting in her house in Odenwald, a painting that still connects her to her time in New York. All right, a few more thanks. Please let me also thank my wonderful colleagues, especially Sarah Girna and Christian Mendonça, and also our project assistant Sasha, for their dedicated work to realize our manifold programs and endeavors, including the special award ceremony. And of course, everything has been so much more difficult since COVID hit, so I really appreciate all the extra energy that we have to invest in making things possible. Thanks also go to Dr. Susanne Rohr, who was a day visiting scholar at Deutsches Haus at NYU a couple of years ago, and who is also a good friend. Together, she and I started crafting the idea of Heinz Ickstadt as the future Sander Prize awardee during Susanne's stay in New York. Thank you, Susanne. We're very happy that the laudation in honor of Heinz Ickstadt will be held by Dr. Andrew Gross, whom I have the pleasure of introducing to you now. Andrew Gross is a professor of American literature at the University of Göttingen. For many years, he worked with Heinz Ickstadt at the John F. Kennedy Institute of the Freie Universität Berlin. Andrew Gross is executive editor of the New American Studies Journal and an assistant editor of the European Journal of American Studies. Recent books include The Pound Reaction, Liberalism and Lyricism in Mid-Century American Literature, which received the Rob Prose Award from the European Association of American Studies. Andrew Gross writes about topics in American poetry, travel literature, Jewish American literature, and liberalism and the public sphere. Andrew, welcome back to Deutsches Haus at NYU. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Juliana. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Tonight, on this overdetermined date in German history, the Deutsches Haus at NYU is honoring Heinz Ickstadt with the Volkmar and Margret Sander Prize. It's an honor for me to be a part of this ceremony and a chance for me to pay tribute to a scholar who has shaped my thinking about American literature and my life. For many years, Heinz was chair of the literature department at the John F. Kennedy Institute for North American Studies at the Free University Berlin. When I came there as a young Fulbright lecturer in 2002, he made me feel at home, so much at home that I'm still in Germany, where I teach American literature today. When I think back over those 20 years or so, I picture Heinz in a couple of characteristic settings. He's in a classroom, or at a conference, or at the Kennedy Institute's weekly colloquium, talking, but also actively listening to what others say. I also see him at the parties that he and his wife Leonora would regularly throw at their apartment on Bundesallee, where similar conversations, but spilling over from books to music and dance and recent plays, would include larger groups made up of dancers, friends, visiting authors, and local cultural figures. These parties still take place and always last until late into the night. There were legendary parties before my time at a house on Bingerstrasse, which had been damaged in the war and had a crack running down one wall to the foundation. That house no longer stands. Its fall even suggests a parable by Edgar Allan Poe. However, the Ickstadts built something on top of that foundation that helped repair the damage of a house divided. They also helped build a bridge across the Atlantic to the United States. Poe was decidedly not the inspiration behind Heinz's discovery of American literature. Rather, it was a class on Herman Melville, taught by an American guest professor that Heinz stumbled upon as an undergraduate. Heinz was actually majoring in German literature at the time, but he was unhappy in the German department, partly because the classes were overfull, and partly because they were taught by professors whose authoritarian demeanor reflected their wartime experiences and perhaps some of the attitudes that led to the Holocaust. The problem was not just in the classroom. Heinz is of that generation of students whose fathers returned from the war broken and bankrupt in more than one sense. Heinz's father was a baker. We can thank a flour allergy for Heinz's refusal to follow him into the family business. Of course, he did not want to follow his father's footsteps for other reasons as well. The class on Melville gave him a glimpse of some alternatives: the life of the mind as opposed to physical labor, democracy and pluralism as opposed to a political and cultural tradition tainted by Germany's recent past. Heinz's essays make it clear that he early on identified with Ishmael and his quest for meaning and companionship. The authoritarian Ahab, on the other hand, seemed to anticipate many of the 20th century's catastrophes. From Melville's sinking ship, which seemed so pertinent to Heinz's situation, perhaps because of its Americanness, Heinz turned to a concrete metaphor that seemed improbably to stay afloat. This was Hart Crane's Brooklyn Bridge. His dissertation on Crane explores how a single lyrical voice can be divided in the same way Melville's characters were divided between opposing viewpoints. It is the job of poetic language to bridge that divide with concrete images of unification. Crane's poetic quest to bring together contradictory American views would become one of Heinz's recurrent themes. It would also become his personal quest. Heinz is a bridge builder. He loves to talk about literature, but he does so to make connections between people, between ideas, perspectives, and places. When he wrote his dissertation at the Kennedy Institute, it was racked by multiple protests. The United States no longer seemed so democratic to students opposed to the Vietnam War, but it was being invoked as a symbol even by those critical of American foreign policy. Students would protest in the streets chanting USA, SS, while listening to American music and wearing blue jeans. When Heinz returned as a professor 10 years later, the fronts had hardened, but so had his commitment to exploring commonalities. The Maoists were arguing with the Trotskyists, the radicals were fighting the liberals, students were forcing professors to step over their prone bodies to enter the classrooms. In these days, before email, members of the faculty would communicate with each other by slipping notes under doors because they couldn't stand to talk face to face. In short, the various sides were pursuing their own white whales, and the ship seemed to be going down. Heinz did what he is so good at. He built bridges. Indeed, he helped save the Kennedy Institute on more than one occasion in ways that were not always acknowledged by the Ahabs of their own various crusades. This bridge building has been a distinguishing feature of Heinz's long march through the institutions of higher education. He was chair of the German Association of American Studies during the process of reunification, with the integration of East German Americanists as the main challenge. While chair of the European Association of American Studies, the challenge was integrating Eastern European American Studies associations, especially those of Belarus, Bulgaria, Romania, and Russia. His success is evident in the vibrancy of both of these institutions, and his method, if that is the right word, was grounded in the insight he had had about American culture from the very beginning. The story Heinz most often tells about American studies in Europe provides an instructive contrast to Poe's collapsing house. It is a story about building solid structures on damaged foundations. Everybody has a different story about America and what it represents. Nevertheless, even competing stories can provide a common ground. This was certainly the case when former European enemies came together to talk about something they had in common. In talking about the United States, they helped build Europe. Fictions don't have to be adjudicated to become institutional reality. They just have to be discussed. This may be what Hart Crane was getting at with his bridge metaphor, which Heinz describes as a symbol, but also as an instantiation, as an incarnation, or as he puts it in one subtitle, the poet's voyage in search of the incarnate world. Heinz, too, has searched for and created an incarnate world. His guide here is a concept of a democratic culture that once counted as the heart of American studies. That concept was sorely tested by the Vietnam War and the protest movements in the 1960s. It was even more tested by the end of the Cold War, when the State Department stopped funding American studies abroad, and scholars of American studies, both in the United States and in Europe, began to wonder whether American studies had always been an arm of American propaganda anyway. By the 1990s, the new consensus seemed to be that American culture was not democratic or pluralistic, but ideological, that it functioned to conceal the inequalities that are still part of American society and still part of American foreign policy. These discussions have had the benefit of broadening the canon and the focus of the discipline. Heinz's own writing, for instance, on the Harlem Renaissance, has profited tremendously from the inclusion of previously excluded voices. Nevertheless, Heinz's perspective as a scholar of American studies outside the continental United States and his experience as a bridge builder has taught him a lesson about institutional rebellion. It is important for each generation to declare its independence from its predecessors. It may be that ritual declarations of independence are the most characteristic feature of American culture. But to challenge the very premise of American studies, for instance, in atonement for American exceptionalism, would render such protests meaningless. Even if democratic culture is a myth, it is a functional myth whose institutional incarnations in the form of jobs, journals, grants, and yes, institutes provide a vantage for further criticism. This is an argument Heinz has made in several important essays on the state of the profession. His point is that American culture does seem like a worthwhile object of study, whatever its role in masking America's failings to live up to its own ideals. Rather than pursuing this line of argument, however, I want to stress how congenial the essay is to Heinz's way of thinking. The essay as a form has been described as a way of saying anything about everything. Perhaps it is Heinz's background in German literature, perhaps it is his international or his institutional perspective. Whatever the cause, he brings a massive range of experience and erudition to bear on everything that interests him. And so many things interest him. Reading the 2 books of essays that grateful students collected for him, not all of his essays by any means, but at least a representative sampling, I am struck by the beauty of the prose. A colleague of mine once remarked that she loved to grade BA and MA level thesis with Heinz because he always writes reports that are like mini essays, splendid to read. His essays also establish a line of cogent and consistent arguments across a range of subjects. Heinz writes in that great German philological tradition that finds parallels where others only encounter disciplinary and yes, national boundaries, invoking, for instance, the French symbolists to make sense of Emily Dickinson's poetics. Perhaps it is not too much to say that in writing his essays, Heinz has been working on one great encyclopedic work. That work is full of pieces on Howells, James, Hart Crane, of course, and William Carlos Williams, also more experimental poets like Creeley and Susan Howe and Frank O'Hara. Heinz writes about modernism and postmodernism. He writes about Pynchon and Powers, the 60s and the 90s, Cooper in the 19th century. He also writes about racism and ethnicity, public art, and the relationship between fictional and historical narratives. He came to Pound late and a bit unwillingly, perhaps more out of a sense of obligation to a fellow scholar than because of any particular affinity to his work. The result, an almost 1,500-page bilingual edition with commentary and a postscript by Heinz Ickstadt, is merely one of many volumes he has teamed up with others to write. These co-productions testify to the importance of dialogue in his concept of democratic culture. I mention this particular volume because I think a recent essay on Pound best describes the coherence between Heinz's various efforts. The surface of Pound's poetry, he says, is crisscrossed by intersecting rings, as if the poet had thrown stones into a body of water to make the ripples spread. Heinz, perhaps perched atop his incarnation of the Brooklyn Bridge, has thrown many such stones. The ripples are plain to see. It is important to also acknowledge their depth. Heinz's deep argument goes back to that early experience of Melville, who brings together so many perspectives and sources in his own encyclopedic text. From Melville and everything he has read since Moby Dick, Heinz has learned to appreciate, and here I quote from one of his essays, the mixing of high and popular culture, the de-hierarchization of the text as artful anti-art, the use of images already processed through the mass media and yet repossessed by the first glance, by the innocent eye that insists on being able to see the world as if new. These, he says, are all aspects of a democratic art that asserts the possibility of new beginnings. He has also learned that, quote, whatever else it does, the novel and other forms of writing also gathers and preserves evidence of a neglected cultural subtext of lingering and unfulfilled desire. It is this aesthetic function of literature as a storehouse of unfulfilled desires and a source of new beginnings that constitutes the social importance of literature. Heinz has garnered other honors, including from Fulbright, the Rockefeller Foundation, the American Council of Learned Societies, the Canadian government, and from various universities and American Studies associations. This prize, I think, is the most fitting. In his work as a writer, a teacher, a host, a communicator, and an academic chair, Heinz has built the bridges that make communication possible between the United States and Germany. I speak for many when I say he is my mentor, my role model, the imagined audience of my own writing, and my friend. Thank you, and congratulations, Heinz Ickstadt.
Thank you, Andrew, for these very personal and thoughtful and touching reflections you just shared with us. Wonderful, wonderful to listen to and to learn even more about Heinz Ickstadt. If we were here at Deutsches Haus at NYU in person, now, as you, the people who have been here for previous Sander Prize ceremonies, you would know that now would be the time when I would say, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Heinz Ickstadt, whom I will now award our 8th Volkmar and Margret Sander Prize. End of quote. But instead, I will provide applause just by myself. And instead of handing the framed prize certificate to Heinz Ickstadt, I'm holding it up for him and you all to see here virtually. And I hope this will come across on the screen. Sarah, can people see that? I think. Yes. Okay, great. And then it will go into the mail to Berlin, and God knows how long it will take to get there. But before I go to the lovely NYU mail room, let's all listen to Heinz Ickstadt's acceptance remarks. I can't wait. So here you go, dear Heinz Ickstadt. Please take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew. Dear colleague and expert in the complex matter of bicultural existence, thank you for your warm, wonderful, gracious, and much too flattering laudatio. My profound thanks go to Margret Sander, to Julian Camfield, and New York University's Deutsches Haus for this year's Volkmar and Margret Sander Prize, which I accept with great joy, but also with a sense of humility and surprise. For whatever I may have done to deserve it goes way back in time. I have been emeritus now for 18 years after an academic career dedicated to the study of America and an attempt to live a transatlantic life. I accept this generous award also as a representative of a generation that grew up in post-war West Germany. I was 9 when that war ended, for whom the US, or should I say a mythical America, meant something very special, an alternative to what we had inherited from our parents. I remember how much I wanted to be part of a society, a country, a culture, a history, of which I could be proud and not ashamed. America had become something of a cultural ideal during those post-war years, more an object of dreams and images than an object of perception and knowledge. To be sure, some argued that this idealized America was imposed on post-war West Germany by the US and by political and economic necessities. But if so, this imposition was readily accepted by a guilty nation as a golden opportunity to become democratic and thus somehow morally more acceptable. As someone who grew up in the 50s and whose life, not only his academic life, was shaped by the fact and even more so by the fiction, or even the fictions of America, I may be forgiven if I make use of personal memories to illustrate my argument. Throughout the 50s, America was for us something like an antidote to the narrowness of German post-war culture, with its ambivalent desire to move on and forget, yet also to stubbornly cling to the notion of a superior German cultural tradition, superior especially to cultureless America, even if that tradition was tainted by a very recent Nazi past. I had an excellent teacher of the German classics who had previously taught at Napola, an elite school of the Nazis. And I had a very exacting, if somewhat cynical French teacher who had survived Auschwitz. And both of these circumstances I found out only later. What we were taught of German history ended with Bismarck. Everything afterwards we had to find out ourselves. And yet, when I began my studies in the mid-50s, I opted for German literature until the conditions of Germanistic at the newly founded Freie Universität Berlin and the discovery that some famous professors had a Nazi past drove me to switch from Germanistic to the new field of American studies. Their seminars, instead of having 200 on the graduate level, were much smaller. And the teaching was more open, more democratic, based on respect for what each of us had to say and exercise in free intellectual exchange. One seminar on the work of Herman Melville shaped my life. It shaped my concept of democracy as a communication among equals, as a mindset and an everyday attitude, something I could easily combine with my dedication to this exciting new love of mine, American literature. My Fulbright year in the Midwest then made me realize that the US was not as ideal a place as I had hoped America would be. I saw a lot that made me wonder, the facts of segregation, for instance, which I saw but didn't allow to sink in on a trip to the South. I believe that my idea of America was saved by John F. Kennedy. I had seen his debates with Nixon on American TV, and a few months later admired his courageous speech after the disastrous invasion attempt at the Bay of Pigs. In 1963, I followed him with my new Jewish American wife through the streets of Berlin, from the Schöneberger Rathaus to the Freie Universität. His murder and the subsequent years of civil rights and Vietnam protests marked the beginning of a long process of disillusion that may not be finished yet. If Fritz Stern has written about the 5 Germanys he has known, I could speak of at least 4 Americas I have taught as a mediator of American literature and culture to several generations of German students. Of course, some would say that it never was 4 different Americas, but always the same US of racial conflict and capitalist exploitation. That the only thing that had changed was my image of it, as well as the images that the changing America projected of itself. The academic field that made America its object of study did not follow this process of illusion and deconstruction, but did not only follow this process of illusion and deconstruction, but was its very motor. If, as the historian Alice Kessler Harris, a former president of the American Association, once said, the heart of American studies is the pursuit of what constitutes democratic culture, then that pursuit must be an ongoing process, a process pushing beyond the limits of academia, something more than just an academic program. In questioning again and again dominant notions of what America in fact was and who belonged to it, this process worked as a powerful dialectic, moving American studies persistently away from the organic concept of a unified and predominantly white culture toward a pluralization of cultural worlds. This urge to move away from any totalizing perspective toward the richness of the particular, be it of race, class, or gender, has informed the development of American studies ever since the faith in America as a cultural whole was first put into doubt, then collapsed. The push away from the general and holistic to ever new particulars established a new pluralism. It led to the discovery of a plurality of American literatures and cultures, to new texts, new frames and categories of analysis, new border crossings, and concomitantly to the creation of new departments of or within American studies. All this has surely diversified the field, but also eroded its foundation. I have profited from these discoveries, many of them exciting and enriching, but try to withstand the centrifugal pull toward unlimited diversification. Mainly because as a German Americanist, I have always tried to look at American literature as an entity, despite its perceived diversities. Therefore, a concept of national coherence still informs my approach to the study of the US and its literary culture. Although I'm aware that it must also be placed into a transnational, a cosmopolitan and comparative frame. Yet I insist that literature is dialogically oriented, that it is created and read not only within a particular group to the exclusion of others, but between groups, even if they are politically or socially apart or set against each other. The idea that the reading and writing of literary texts follows ethnic, race, or gender divisions may respond to the ideological, even the emotional needs of a conflicted society, or follow the dynamics of an ever greater differentiation into separate academic fields, or follow the dynamics of an ever greater differentiation into separate academic, eventually into separate departments. Yet it has held only limited appeal for me, since I see literature as always able, even eager, to cross these very lines of separation by virtue of its curiosity about and imaginative empathy with the other. A curiosity that is stronger than the desire to belong to, even to embedded in a particular group. That is why literature can radically question and overcome limited certainties, even the certainties and restrictions of identity politics. I'm aware that this view is partly due to the privilege of an outside position. Non-American Americanists should be committed to studying the United States as something of an entity, as an object in front of their very eyes. And I'm weary that the German Association of American Studies, whose chairman I once was some 30 years ago, tends to forego that advantage by following the American example too closely. From our position outside, we see our American other differently than our colleagues within the United States, who are determined to escape the premises as well as the rhetoric of the discipline's nationalist foundation in the 30s, when he tried to academically establish a homegrown American culture against the continuing dominance of especially English culture. I'm also aware that this totalizing view from outside might be a generational one. I remember an English colleague accusing the first generation of European Americanists, to which I belong, as having been brainwashed by agents of American cultural policy. And indeed, I got an idea of what he meant when, after the opening of the Berlin Wall a representative of USIA told me that now, after the Cold War had been won, it was time for American studies to ride into the sunset. Although I found this offensive, it did not make me regret what I had done as a professor of American literature, a subject, although its contexts have changed, to which I remained committed even during my long years of retirement. Does that imply that I am still loyal to my original concept of America? Yes and no. The US surely cannot be taken as model and ideal any longer, but we can still learn from it, positively and negatively. As Susan Neiman has recently shown in her learning from the Germans, confronting race and the memory of evil, there could even be a mutual learning process, and it would indeed be foolish not to look at the United States when we might benefit from its example. Does that make me believe in American exceptionalism? I don't think so. Although there are many aspects of its history and culture that make it different and quite particular in its contradictions, self-projections, and self-deceptions. Ever since the mid-19th century, American artists and intellectuals have seen America's otherness vis-à-vis an overbearing European culture as grounded in a democratic principle. That, as Herman Melville once wrote to his publisher Everett Duyking, the Declaration of Independence does make a difference. This conviction, with its concomitant emphasis on the common and the everyday, has been the motto of American aesthetic innovation ever since. It has given impulse to great many often antagonistic aesthetics, from William Dean Howells's realism to William Carlos Williams or Langston Hughes' trust in the poetic resource of ordinary speech, or the deconstruction of textual hierarchy in Gertrude Stein's Poetics, the linguistic democracy of each word having equal weight. And it accounts for the alignment of democracy and the arts in John Dewey's pragmatist aesthetics, with its emphasis on a continuous process of innovation and reform. An evolutionary drive toward what Ralph Waldo Emerson called this new, yet unapproachable America. Although the power of this aesthetic ideology, rooted in the democratic principle, may now be exhausted, it has worked as a creative incentive far into the 20th century. It has certainly empowered American modernism, informed its theories, and formed its practices. It makes its various manifestations peculiarly American without making them exceptional. In other words, my faith in democracy still derives from that seminar of 60 years ago, more than from the political reality of America itself. Since then, my American wife has taught me to believe in the down-to-earth approach and the do-it-yourself tradition that have been so dominant in American life, and surely are values worth sharing. If we despair of contemporary politics, of the persistent power of the many kinds of Trumpism in the US, as well as in Europe, we should also think of the counterforce of democratic networking that took Georgia away from Trump. Democracy for me is thus rather a metaphor for personal attitude towards others, a state of mind, a way of life. I associate it specifically with John Dewey's down-to-earth utopian belief in creative democracy, which he formulated also in a period of social crisis as his credo and his testament. Democracy, he said, is a reality only as it is indeed a commonplace of living. It is the sole way of living which believes wholeheartedly in the process of experience as end and as means. Need and desire go beyond what exists. They continually open the way into the unexplored and unattained future. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Heinz Ickstadt. Hey. With sound and without sound. Thanks for joining in the chorus here, Andrew and Marty. Thank you for your powerful and insightful speech that transported me back to the John F. Kennedy Institute in the late 80s or early 90s or 1928, whenever it was. And reminded me of why I've always been so inspired by you and how you've put me on a path that has led to this room. So thank you.
Thank you again, Julia.
Yeah. It's been such a pleasure to be able to give you this award, and Margret and I are so you accepted it, and I want to thank you all, Andrew, Marty, Sarah, Margaret, Joan, Susanna. It takes a village to put together these things, and this was so meaningful, I hope not just for me, but for everyone else. So thank you, Heinz Ickstadt, for all you've done as a bridge builder. That is a wonderful description. A vermittler between cultures and worlds and times, and look forward to for this dialogue to be continued by your many students and people you have inspired on both sides of the Atlantic, and probably also elsewhere, to make it into a bigger picture. It's always strange to end things so abruptly, because usually we would have a reception and then we would take out the guests for dinner. So it's sad that we can't do that, but we will be back in person at some point, and we will be taking out our distinguished speakers for dinners and luncheons again to exchange views in a more informal setting. In the meantime, let me just mention that our annual festival Neue Literatur is starting on Thursday. The topic will be Turn and Face the Strange, which seems timely every day these days. So if you have time, join us for these events that happen virtually and will bring together German language authors from Austria, Switzerland, Germany, and Liechtenstein in dialogue with US intellectuals and writers. So please join us. And in case, last but not least, you've been wondering about the images behind me, these are photos by a New York-based German photographer named Stefan Falke, who took to the streets during COVID and documented what was happening in a very changed New York. We're showing these right now, and hopefully we will be able to celebrate Stefan's work with a public event whenever Deutsches Haus at NYU will be open to the general public, hopefully in the spring semester, to bring this wonderful exhibition to a close. And yeah, I'm running out of things to say, but I don't want to say goodbye. So this is the long goodbye. Thank you, everybody. Dankeschön. Have a wonderful day and evening. Please stay in touch and join us again soon. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Juliana.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.